Welcome and thank you for joining us. This is our first show of the season, and with that, I'm your new host, Juanita Tautungi. In our live show today, we're talking about a couple of familiar issues: the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, including the Commission, and the deaths in Thunder Bay among Aboriginal people. Today, we'll recap some of the issues, connect with reporters who worked on those stories, and hear the perspectives from our guests. And we want you to join our conversation. Our phone lines are open. Call us toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. You can also tweet us at APTN InFocus. Use the hashtag MMIWG InFocus, or send us an email, infocus@aptn.ca. Before I introduce you to our guests, let's set the scene and put the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in focus.
Oh, I pray they find someone who did this to you, my sisters. Rest in peace.
To sit in that tent by the river and hear the first testimony in the inquiry was an incredible moment.
We do hope that this inquiry is going to start showing leadership and being more inclusive of families. So we would hope that rather than having a restart, a reset, we want to see a restructure from the commissioners at the inquiry.
Well, I think the timeline definitely was disappointing. You know, a 2-year timeline, as you've heard, like other inquiries have had 5 years. And families have been fighting for this for 30 years. You know, we're rushing this, and we've also heard the lead commissioner say that if she could go back, like, she wouldn't be in such a rush, she would slow things down. And I think we need to slow things down.
There's a lot of confusion. The families are unaware about the inquiry. They're unaware specifically about what's happening today, because I had no idea what was expected.
The commissioners themselves actually spent the majority of their time talking to our assembly yesterday about all of the things that they didn't do, of all the things that they didn't achieve, at the fact that they were not transparent, at the fact that they had not delivered what they wanted to deliver.
If we do a hard reset, all of the work that has been done thus far, that will go to waste. The families, the 55 families in Whitehorse who testified, they've asked us in the South to have patience, to give the inquiry a chance.
Immediate action needs to take place. We are calling on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to intervene and to create a safe place for the recommendations that were made. And those recommendations include replacing the commissioners.
I don't know if the inquiry will survive. I don't know if Trudeau may come out tomorrow and reset. I have no clue. And I don't need to really know. I think right now we just focus on the families. That's what they told us, families first.
Because we've never had that opportunity where we get to say what has happened to our family in one place and have it encapsulated.
A lot of compelling comments on there and a lot to talk about. And joining us now in studio is Tim Fontaine. He is a Winnipeg-based journalist here to give us his perspective on today's topics, and Kathleen Martens. She's a reporter here at APTN. Now, both Kathleen and Tim have been working on these stories about the inquiry since it was called in 2016, and Kathleen will also be at the National Inquiry coming up in Winnipeg, Rankin Inlet, Nunavut, and Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, and she's here to tell us more about that as well. Thank you so much for coming in studio today, to the both of you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We also have a couple of guests from British Columbia. Gladys Radek is in Terrace, BC. She's joining us by Skype. And Bernie Williams, she's in our Vancouver studio. They are the co-founders of Walk for Justice, the nonprofit organization which raises awareness of the missing and the murdered. So thank you both to our guests in British Columbia. So let's begin with you, Gladys. Just last week you took part in the Walk for Justice in Smithers. Can you tell us how it was for you?
It was quite emotional, and it was It was very humbling because Walk for Justice had walked in 2008 for the inquiry, and this was our 7th walk completed, and it was also on Tamara's 12th anniversary of her being missing. And so for me, it was very humbling to realize the steps that we had all taken. And a lot of the walkers were the original walkers that we had pulled together to complete this 7-year cycle of walking that we did for the inquiry.
So Gladys, just for our viewers who aren't aware, who was Tamara?
Tamara is my niece, and she went missing on September 21st, 2005 at the northernmost tip of the Highway of Tears between Prince Rupert and Prince George. She went missing out of Prince Rupert.
All right, thank you for telling us about her a bit, and our thoughts are with your family. Bernie, can you talk about what the significance at this walk, this particular walk, was for you?
Well, it was not only for Tamara, but we have a family member also that went missing back in the late 70s, Irene White. She was also pregnant. She was about 8 months pregnant when she had gone missing, almost in the same area as Tamara Chipman went missing. So this was very significant for us, for the supporters that came from Vancouver, which was BWSS and the Downtown Eastside Women's Center. As you know, that both organizations do a lot for the family members and survivors that are left behind down here. So they also joined us on this walk. So it was actually quite amazing. It was to do the last walk and have so many supporters come out, and yeah.
So then, Bernie, can you talk about the experience at the hearings in Smithers last week?
For myself personally, I thought that, my thoughts are that it went extremely well. The protocols, right down to the hereditary chiefs, to the matriarchs, to the elders, the cultural, the cultural component of it was done so amazingly, and the families, it was hard to sit, in those meetings, but through it all, I thought it was just very well done. The team put it together really well. The health team were just amazing. The commissioners that were there, but the families, it stayed focused around the families. So I was very pleased with it, and a lot of great comments and lots of great feedback, from the supporters too.
All right, let's go back to Gladys quickly and just get her perspective on how the hearings went last week.
I think because we have heard the stories many, many times, and I was really proud of each and every one of the family members that came forward and told their story about their loved one. And it just kind of, I think it helped the family. I heard from a lot of family members that once they did tell their story, that they were relieved and that they felt a weight coming off of their shoulders because they were able to share. Like the one family shared after 46 years. So I think that for the families, I'm very pleased with how they felt afterwards. Because, this is our history, and I'm glad that the families felt comfortable in their environment. And I guess with our walkers as well, it kind of proved a point to the rest of Canada that we were absolutely right when we delivered our first database to Ontario, where we were saying that on the Highway of Tears we had way more than the 18 that our CMP were saying. And as it was, we had 39 testimonies. So.
All right. Well, let's get to our in-studio guests now. Tim, how do you feel the start of the hearings have gone so far?
Well, I think I'm just going to echo what the two guests said. I mean, the inquiry, the commission has done a very good job of reinventing itself in every region that they go to, and it's something that they said that they're going to have to do. It can't be an easy job to identify all of the protocols and all of the families and all of these things in the different regions they go to. And some of the families that I've spoken to that have taken part, I was at the first one in Whitehorse, and I was at the ones in, and I watched the other ones that have taken place so far. And the families are, I don't know if pleased is the right word for it, right? But I mean, they feel that they're being respected, they feel that they're being heard, and they feel that the inquiry is doing a good job of being respectful and opening up a space for them to speak and to be heard. And like the two guests said, Bernie and Gladys, some of them, this is the first time that they've spoken publicly, so it's not an easy thing to do. On the other hand, there's this disconnect still between what the inquiry is doing with the hearings and the inner workings of the commission, which for people from the outside still very much look like they're in turmoil and still aren't as transparent as people would like. So there's this weird disconnect now between the commission itself and their inner workings and the hearings that they're doing in the communities. So, yeah.
And Kathleen, do you think that families are being served as they should be with the inquiry so far?
Well, the expectations going into the one in 2 weeks in Winnipeg are extremely high. So I don't know really if those can be met. Hearing what Gladys and Bernie had to say today, I think that is actually news that families felt heard, felt listened to. Some of them shared after decades of keeping quiet. That shows some trust is happening there, or maybe is being built, that we haven't heard before. That's very interesting. I know that the families here are very worried. They still feel that they're on the sidelines. They're not clear what's going to happen. Communication is just being underscored as a real weakness. So I think if they get a chance to hear what Bernie and Gladys have to say, maybe that will give them that little push they need. A lot of them are feeling not confident about going forward and even registering. You know, I've talked to several who say, we haven't registered yet to speak, and we're not sure we're going to. We might just wait and see who else comes forward. So hearing what your guests have to say today might give some families here in Manitoba a little bit of a push that they need, because right now they're being very hesitant about participating.
So either Tim or Kathleen, what else have you heard from the families so far about how the inquiry is going?
Well, again, I mean, it's different when you ask families how they feel about the actual hearings themselves. Like when I was in Whitehorse, a lot of the families were surprised. They were, and some of them were saying, like what you were saying, was that, you know, there was a lot of anticipation before this thing happened, right? And a lot of people weren't even sure. They wanted to boycott it. They wanted to do all of these things because they didn't feel that they were a part of it. And they still don't feel, I think, that they're a part of it. But when they see that people are actually having, you know, because it is about the families, right? And it is about those stories. So when they're actually being respectfully heard, I think it changes something. But that's just one part of this whole process, right? I mean, hearing the families is one part. It's a very, very important part, but it's just one part. It's the things that are going to happen after, the calls for action, the changes from society and government and agencies, all of these things. That's where a lot of people are already looking too, I think. Like, how effective is this actually going to be? Or is this just an exercise in letting the families speak, which is important as well. But at the same time, something needs to happen after this. And I think a lot of families are sort of between those two aspects, right? They want to be heard, at the same time they want something to change and they want something to happen.
Absolutely, and like you couldn't have said it any better. They don't want to be used.
Yeah.
They say the amount of stress that goes into preparing to tell your story, then telling your story, sharing it. Then the recovery period after, you know, I talked to Sean Ledoux. He talked about his mom being murdered in Whitehorse, and he said that he had some counseling after, and then now he's been given a phone number to call so he can stay in touch and get some phone counseling, like just touch base as this thing still continues to travel across Canada. All the families are going to be in a similar boat. They need help before, during, and after.
Yeah, we're talking, you know, potentially thousands of people here that are being, I guess, re-traumatized. Really, I mean, they're having these old wounds opened up again, and that was one of the fears that we heard going into the public hearings, was what kind of support is going to be there for them. So that sort of level of support, I think, needs to continue, and that needs to be addressed. I mean, communication is such a huge part of this thing, and that's one of the strictest, or one of the hardest criticisms we've heard of the inquiry, is that their communications are poor. These are the things that families need to hear. These are the things that the public needs to hear, that there are things there for them, right? That if you come, you're not just coming and being used, right? You're not just coming and telling your story and then bye-bye. You know, there has to be things in place for them, and it sounds like they are, but it's they've got to do a better job of communicating that.
And we're going to talk more about communications within the commission, and we'll also talk about what you're going to be covering at the upcoming hearings coming up. But first, we'll take a quick break. Join our conversation now. Send your thoughts in an email to infocus@aptn.ca, like our APTN InFocus Facebook page, follow and tweet us at APTN InFocus, or call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Welcome back. Well, let's go to social media now to hear what some of you are saying about today's topic. Our first question: do you think the National Inquiry can be doing anything different? On Twitter, at Emma E. Cooper _ says, the inquiry into MMIWG needs to consult better with the families of victims. It should be conducted in a respectful way. Working with Indigenous people to tell their story is vital. Patrick on Facebook writes in, stop taking their sweet time and follow through with it to its entirety. Our second question that we posted: how do you feel the National Inquiry into MMIWG is doing? Dre Will wrote in, just like everything else, nothing. They let people tell their stories, make us believe that we're heard. And Dorothy McEwen on Facebook writes in, like many thought, a waste of money that could be put to better use with support services where needed. Now, if you want to join the conversation, this is how you can get in touch with us. Join our conversation now. Send your thoughts in an email to infocus@aptn.ca, like our APTN InFocus Facebook page, follow and tweet us at APTN InFocus, or call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Now let's talk about the commission. It used to be 5, now it's 4 commissioners who make up the group heading the inquiry. The inquiry is set to last until December 31st, 2018, but the commission has already requested an extension. An interim report with preliminary findings is still expected to be completed by next month on November 1st. If granted, a final report could be delayed. That report will suggest ways on how to stop the violence towards Indigenous women and girls, including the LGBTQ and the Two-Spirited. Now the inquiry's commissioners have had their share of challenges, scrutinized for their lack of communication with families, the resignation from one commissioner, how the hearings are being handled. Here's what Chief Commissioner Marion Buller had to say about the state of the commission this year in July.
Things are not drifting. We have to put this in the right context. We started on September 1st, 4 commissioners and myself, and a piece of paper, our terms of reference. In 8 months, we hired staff, we opened offices, we put life to our terms of reference, and we held our first hearing. In my view, that's lightning speed, especially when we had to comply with government policies and rules.
Well, let's go back to our guests for their reaction to that clip. Tim, did you want to start?
Well, I mean, you got to feel for the commissioners in some way. I mean, there's a lot of expectations on them. There's a lot of expectations on this inquiry. We've heard so many people say, I mean, this thing is decades in the making. This thing is decades in the waiting. And so you have some families saying, slow down. You have some families saying, take the time you need to do this right. You have other families saying, like we saw on social media there, we have people saying, like, hurry up. What's the holdup here, right? So it's certainly not an easy job. On the other hand, like we said earlier, I mean, there's ways that they've slipped up. They're by the sounds of it, they're trying to address it, but I don't know if it's ever going to be enough for all of the people that have expectations on this inquiry. And none of the criticisms are unwarranted or unjustified, right? These are all legitimate concerns that people have at the commission. So, yeah, we'll just have to wait and see how they ride through this and how they make changes within the inquiry and the commission to try and make as many people satisfied as they can. So,
right.
Yeah.
How about let's go over to Gladys in Terrace via Skype. Hi, Gladys, are you still with us?
Yes.
All right. Did you hear the clip from Chief Commissioner Marion Buller?
Yes.
Okay. What are your thoughts to that?
Well, there's a lot of families to cover, first of all. And we have to remember that these commissioners are hearing these stories for the first time. You know, as I said, you know, a long time ago, as us walkers and everything, we were basically seasoned because we've heard all of these stories. It took us years to gather the information from the families, and for them to sit there and have to pay attention, it's you know, it could take a long time. And the thing is, they have the power to also try and not only listen to them, but bring up some good recommendations that they will have the power to change. They're working towards change, and we need to, you know, have them listen to our stories in their entirety.
Definitely a challenging position they do have. And just yesterday we learned about the federal government's request for strategic communications. Kathleen, what are your thoughts on that, first of all?
Well, you know, they didn't make any kind of an announcement about it. We just sort of found out about it and wrote a story, and I think it took everybody by surprise. And usually when you're a reporter and you send in a request saying, hey, what can you tell me about why you're doing this? I got an answer within hours, which was pretty amazing. They said, listen, we've only got 2 communications people. We need a team, so we've put up this ad. We're asking for help. So it does sort of sound like they're trying to get improve their communications, but on the other hand, if you've got new people coming on that have to be brought up to speed, they won't be in time for Winnipeg, which is in a couple of weeks. They've got a whole schedule of hearings already set up. I can't imagine that anybody can come in that fast. So I think it's just another kind of a wrench, like where their intentions are good, but the way it's being handled sort of seems bad.
Well, it might work for their benefit just in terms of the communications part of the commission, because, for example, our show invited one of the commissioners to be a part of today's panel to talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and the commission and the inquiry, how it's going so far. But unfortunately, we didn't hear back from anybody there. So let's just hope for the best that this will improve communications and in other ways. So Tim, why don't we go to you now and talk about your experience with communications in your role as a journalist when you've been working on stories such as this.
It's ebbed and flowed with the commission. I know very early on, I was like one of many journalists who tried to get answers, who tried to get information from the commission and got like nothing, not even email saying we're going to get back to you and we're going to do this, right? So, and I mean, if you're used to dealing with Ottawa, you're used to dealing with all of these things, you'll often at least get somebody saying something, right? But they would give you nothing, and then things would get better for a while, and then they would say, oh yeah, you know, we can have somebody come and do an interview with you and all of these things, and then it would stop again and would go, you know. And I know people right now that have requests in with the commission that aren't getting anything again. So it's been really uneven, and that's not good. That's not good for anybody. That's not good for families who want to get answers. If it's hard for us, whose job it is to get answers from people, you can imagine a family member who has no experience with any of this trying to find out what's happening. I mean, that's not a good sign. And it's like you said. I mean, hopefully this communications firm, in the long run, hopefully can help the commission get better at just doing basic things like answering an email for people and giving people the answers that they need. I mean, there were so many things that the commission has done over their lifetime where, yeah, we were taken by surprise. Mm-hmm. Like, whoa, okay, well, where did that happen? You know, and there was no lead up to it. There was no, you know, no announcements or anything like that. So I mean, it's got to do better. It's definitely got to do better.
Well, let's help out a little bit with communications by having Kathleen sitting here with us. And as we mentioned in the beginning of the show, you're going to be heading to a number of hearings coming up this year. So why don't you tell us what your expectations are heading to those hearings as a journalist, and maybe we can squeeze in some time to let our viewers know when and where these hearings are going to be taking place.
For sure, yeah, because you know, it's our job to try to give as much information as we can, and families can handle the facts. You know, that's something they've told us all along, like, keep it real, just tell us what you know, we'll deal with it as best we can. So what we can say is Winnipeg's happening in a couple of weeks. It'll be at a downtown venue, and the commissioners there are going to hear something they've never heard before, which is they were in a couple of rural areas, which is they were in the Yukon and they were in northern BC. Well, now they're going to be in a major urban center. They're going to hear about the impact of foster care, gangs, drugs, sex trafficking, all of that, all of those elements on murdered and missing Indigenous women. So it's going to be, you know, from a rural background to now this urban center. We're going to hear some really scary stuff. And then from there, they're going to go to their first Eastern hearing. They're going to go to Halifax, where there are over 100 murdered and missing women in the Maritimes. And then they'll come back, cross back into the west. They're going to be in Edmonton. And then up to Yellowknife, where we'll have a team as well there. We're going to have reporters in all of these cities. There will be in Saskatoon, we're going to be in Quebec, Thunder Bay, and then lastly, Rankin Inlet, Nunavut, where again, it'll be very different information about murdered and missing women, where relationship violence is a huge factor. There aren't roads, so we don't have a lot of women missing, they say, in the territory, but they do have a lot of domestic violence, murders. I've been talking to some family members leading up to that hearing in a few weeks, and they're kind of sketching out some of the stuff that they're going to talk about there. And there they say they want to go public. You know, the families have the option of speaking privately or publicly at these hearings. And a lot of them, the ones I've talked to in Nunavut say they want to speak publicly because they want to educate Canada about the situation they face there. They don't have enough shelters. They don't have enough mental health workers. They don't have a lot of counseling. You know, in the north, everything is that much more isolated. And so they want to talk to not only the commissioners, but the rest of Canada about the violence facing women and girls in Canada's north.
All right, thank you for that, Kathleen. We'll head back to our guests in BC in just a moment. First of all, Chief Vivian Tom from the Wet'suwet'en First Nation in British Columbia shared her powerful story with the inquiry in Smithers last week. Her daughter, Destiny Tom, was killed by a common law partner at just 21 years of age. Have a listen.
So I was at church one time in Burns Lake after I heard about the autopsy report. they said with that there was brain hemorrhaging and broken ribs, the spine separating from the body, the head being separated. And I couldn't stop crying when I heard that. That's how I went up for prayer, and I just cried and I cried. And then I thought of how I was robbed of that chance to be with Destiny, to say goodbye to her. And all of a sudden, it was just like, in my mind, I could see this vision. This tall pastor was standing beside me, and he was tall. And this part, it's going to be pretty intense. That's all I can say. But I had to do it. In my mind, I could see, like I had my eyes closed when I was being prayed over, and I could see Destiny's body on the road, in the mud and the snow, the yellow tarp covering her. And you know, when they said that I couldn't cross that line to hold her, to hug her, to say goodbye to her, that really broke my heart as a mother. In my mind, I could see that Destiny was laying there. It was just like she was laying there, and I was walking back and forth. I was just like a caged lion. It's just like I could see her, but I couldn't be with her. And I just kept on walking back and forth and walking and looking at her. It's like, how can I get to her? How can I get to her? And then I finally just barged through that line. I went to her. I lifted up that tarp. I crawled under the blanket, the tarp with her, and I hugged her. I grabbed her in my arms. I said, Destiny, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what happened to you. I love you and I miss you. I'm so sorry that you were all alone when this happened. I'm so sorry that we weren't there to protect you as Mom and Dad. I'm so sorry, baby. I love you. And I just kept on holding her and rocking her in my arms. I just couldn't stop crying when I was getting prayed over. I said, Destiny, I'm so sorry. I wanted to be there with you, but we couldn't. I'm so sorry that you had to go through this alone. And I told her, I said, we'll look after Cassidy the best that we can. We'll raise her. We love her just like our own. We love her just like we love you.
Very emotional testimony right there. Bernie, can you talk about how this is also a healing journey for people who give their testimony at hearings?
I think, you know, even taking that risk to open up, it's a really huge thing. And I've spent a lot of time with some of the families and that, and just to listen their fears at the beginning. What was mentioned earlier, that there's some families that waited till the very last day in Smithers to give their statement and that, and you know, for myself, I really can't imagine what they're going through. I know what I was going through, and I haven't even given my statement yet. And just listening to Chief Vivian Tom, because I was there, and the heartbreak and the heartache, for her loved one, it's something that is so real that unless you were there to witness it, it was so emotional and that. And I'm also thinking about today, so many families nationally with the red dress, October 4th. That's, you know, it's really, really hard for a lot of the families today too. And, but just like the strength of our families, our, you know, our people, like the resilience that, you know, we have, you know, within, you know, who we are, it speaks volumes in that of, you know, we, well as, you know, First Peoples of this land that for so many decades, that, you know, how heck they've tried to wipe us out. And I was one of the ones that would, at the beginning, I did not want to support heck this well inquiry. I did not want to, you know, well, attach my name to, you know, any part of it, because, you know, heck, you fight for so long and do all these walks, you know, compile datas and spend your time, you know, on these trenches and that. And then I had a little glimmer of hope in that. And so it's, you know, it's my prayer that heck, to the families nationally, heck, to give this, you know, process a chance in that. And I really believe in this. You know, I have personally watched the work that has been done. Yes, there, you know, has been a lot of mistakes that, you know, heck, were being made, and heck, they're still going to be made. You know, heck, mistakes will be made. But I have fought too long. I have a family member who's near the studio right now who has asked me to pass this message on, that if there is going to be heck, a restart, this family member wants heck, to do heck, a class action against these coalitions who are, you know, trying to stand in the way of the work that's been done. And she is willing heck, to take heck, to do a lawsuit, because she has also fought very long for this. And it's unfortunate, you know, the way things are happening. And I really need to stress this, that we talk about the lateral violence against our women, but I have to say this straight up, you know, I am watching it right in front of us, the ones that are trying to stop this process. Yes, again, heck, there's been a lot of, you know, mistakes that have been made, but we as family members, you know, who have fought alongside with other family members nationally, you know, I'm just asking, you know, heck, to really rethink and heck, to step back. And, you know, I've yet to hear the ones that heck are trying to boycott this, that I've yet to hear them ask, you know, the commissioners, you know, what kind of help, you know, can we assist you with? We understand you're struggling with this, you know, but can we help you? You know, can we assist? That's what we've been doing with, you know, the commissioners. We've been asking those questions. And, you know, heck, we are willing to walk, like, you know, through this with them. And, you know, and I always try to imagine, you know, what it would be like, you know, heck, if we all stood together, you know, heck, in solidarity, because I always believe, you know, that the government, you know, has already set this up to fail. I really do believe that. But, you know, we as families, like, we need to pull this together, you know, to have this succeed and heck, to be successful.
Yeah.
But in the overall of that, I really support heck, this process, and the stories, you know, of the families, you know, heck, it needs to be heard.
Thank you so much for that, Bernie. I really appreciate your thoughts on that. And I'd like to thank our guests, Gladys, Radek, and Bernie Williams, and as well Kathleen Martens. Thank you so much for providing your perspectives on this. Do stay with us. After the break, we'll talk about the incidents at the river in Thunder Bay of Indigenous people. First, though, here's a clip from one grandfather whose grandson was found dead in the river. Stay with us.
It's almost like one too many under the same circumstances. And what is it? That's what I'd like to know is, what is it? What's going on? What's wrong? Why in the same place?
Well, Thunder Bay, Ontario has been hit time and time again with deaths and incidents among Indigenous people. The latest was exactly 1 week ago today when police pulled a 20-year-old man from the river, just 4 days after the body of 21-year-old Dylan Muniz was discovered near the same area. The fifth case of a body being found near a Thunder Bay waterway this year alone, all under the age of 21. Now, the community has been left questioning the role of the police.
There is zero confidence from our community that they can work with the Thunder Bay Police, that they don't have confidence in them, that they will investigate any of the tragic events that we've seen in Thunder Bay, and there has to be some confidence in the police service there.
Willow Fiddler is our video journalist in Thunder Bay. She's one of our reporters who has been covering these stories. Willow, thanks for joining us this afternoon. What has the community's reaction been, especially to the latest incidents?
Well, naturally, a lot of concern and worry. Last week, there was 3 reported incidents of someone being found in the river. One of those, like you mentioned, was Dylan Muniz. The other 2 survived. So the one scene we went to, there was groups of people going because they've seen pictures on social media. This information gets out to people fast when there's something happening at the river now. So groups of people were gathering, wondering what was happening, and even parents I spoke to concerned that it could be possibly their child. So a lot of concern and worry about these incidents that continue to happen here.
What is the mood like in Thunder Bay, especially when another incident happens?
Well, like I said, a lot of worry and concern, a lot of questions. It just brings up a lot of, and it brings up a lot of things from the past. So there's still a lot of families over the last couple of decades who don't have, questions answered about what happened to their loved ones. And just this ongoing shock, I guess. I mean, I think about Josiah Baig's mother's reaction on social media when she found out, or she read a report about these rescues happening, and it was just kind of a sense of what's happening. And Josiah's grandfather as well, like we heard, like what's happening? Why does this continue to happen? That's the general feeling.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's bring Tim back into the conversation. Thank you for sticking around this hour, Tim. What are your thoughts on what Willow's just said and the issues that seem to be plaguing Thunder Bay?
That's the thing. I mean, like Willow said, I think a lot of people who aren't from Thunder Bay or from anybody who's watching what's happening in that area is just like, what is going on there, right? I mean, there's a lot of I think it's at the point where it's outrage and it's shock, continuous shock. Like how can they pull another body out of that river? How can these things continue to happen when they've had an inquest, when they've had all of this attention on that area? These things continue to happen. In many ways, I guess it's like it's a microcosm of Canada. Everything that's happening in this town, right? These legacies of colonialism. You have poor relations with police. You have people, leaving urban areas to go in. I mean, rural areas to go to the urban areas to try and get a better education. All of these things that are happening in Canada are centered on this one little community in Thunder Bay. So it's in some ways it's understandable. Maybe not understandable, but you can see why it's happening. But it's no less shocking when it continues to happen. And we got to remember, these are children. We're not talking, kids that are being pulled out of the river, kids that are being found dead, and many in 1 year. If that happened, you do have to wonder if that happened anywhere else in Canada, would it be tolerated? And you could see why there's outrage from leaders and from families and from anybody who's watching what's happening there. It's hard to imagine. So, it's just a lot of outrage.
Willow, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so we're kind of getting a sense here with these rescues happening. So like I mentioned, there were 3 reported incidents, but we're getting more information now from police who started what they called Project Floodway last November, December, and it was they started it in response to the recommendations from the student inquest. And the numbers that they're coming back with are somewhat shocking. So, you know, like I said, we reported 3 incidents in just 1 week. Since last November, December, they've reported more than 400 incidents or encounters with people along the riverbanks in 3 or 4 identified higher risk areas. And that's just since last winter. That's involved more than 200, almost 300 individuals, and they say that they've saved the lives of at least 50 of those people who were either found sleeping or passed out close to the river, and they're saying some of these people are either just falling in or even jumping in. That's kind of the information we're getting from the police at this point.
Well, let's keep talking about the role of the police, and we just heard a clip a few minutes ago about, you know, the role of the police, but I'm just wondering, maybe, Tim, do you have any thoughts on the police's role in how it's been handling these incidents?
It hasn't been good. I mean, I'm sure that the rescues themselves are done well, but you know, it's obvious from anybody who's watching is that relations between police and Indigenous people in that area is not a good one. I mean, it's not good in many regions of Canada, but there it seems to be quite bad. There's a level of mistrust, I think, in the police. It's something that we hear often whenever there are people that are missing or murdered, right, is that they don't feel like they're taken seriously by police. That seems to be what's happening here as well. I know that they've assigned people to look into this. There's been shakeups within the local police force. Hopefully that changes something. But you know, the problem is also bigger than the police, I think. I mean, there's a lot of things that are at play here. The police, I think, are just one part of a huge problem that's happening in Thunder Bay. I mean, it doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be addressed, but it is just one piece of I think, a much larger problem.
Mm-hmm. Willow, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, Tim's right. There is a very, you know, not a lot of trust of the police here, especially for First Nations families, and that's been something that's, you know, kind of been up and down over the last couple of decades or so, as these incidents tend to happen in phases. You know, and like Tim also said, you know, they're under investigation right now. There's 2 separate investigations into the police service itself, and then also the police service board. And you know, people are putting a lot of hopes and expectations on those reviews and the outcomes, recommendations. And of course, we're going to be presented with recommendations again next year, and how these groups choose to act on those is what we'll be watching for too.
All right. Well, here are some comments we received on social media about our question on Thunder Bay. We asked on Facebook, what needs to happen to keep youth safe in Thunder Bay? Now, Muckwa Bear Clan Patrol, Muckwa says, Bear Clan patrols connect with the youth at the street level, create a place for the youth to drop in that is at the street level or in the downtown core of cities. And Grace writes in, I personally think that there should be a big town discussion, much like a sharing circle rather. Perhaps even the white people will begin to share their stories as part of healing together. Thank you so much for those comments, and do participate during our shows, which happens every Wednesday. We'll post questions on social media that can involve you, our viewers, to be a part of the show and the topics that we discover. Well, that brings us to the end of this first show of the season. I'd like to thank my guests, Kathleen Martens, Gladys Radek, Willow Fiddler, and in studio with his perspective, Tim Fontaine. Our callers hopefully will call in next show, and especially to those who reached out to us on social media to take part in today's important conversations. And we'd like to thank you, our viewers. Join us next week. We'll put a documentary into perspective called Human Trafficking, Canada's Secret Shame. I'm Juanita Tautungi. We leave you now with some visuals from the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls hearing from last week in Smithers, BC. Have a wonderful evening.